Yep, you're still muted. You have to unmute. Rabbi Berzon, you have to unmute.
After wishing everyone a good morning, Shavua Tov, we're trying to figure out, based on an essay of Rebbe Chanan Wasserman.
Can we have this shir dedicated to someone who just passed away from our kollel?
Yeah, please.
His name is Tzvi Ben Yehuda, Ben Yaakov Yehuda, Tzvi Bernstein, in his memory.
Yeah. We had the insight of Rebbe Chanan as far as a Derabanan is concerned, whether it does have the status of a Doraisa with regard to the Chiyuv of Zaken Mamre. And he made two distinctions. Let's just review them very quickly. One distinction is between Chametz and Orla, where Chametz has an Isur Kares in and of itself. And when the Rabbanan extended the Isur Chametz as a vote of the Sanhedrin Agdola to begin on the 6th hour, creating an Isur Derabanan of Hana in the 6th hour, that is considered a Davar Sheyesh Bo Kares, because Chametz itself has Kares. In contrast, Orla could never generate Kares. It's a separate Chiyuv Lav, so it maxes out at Malchus, it doesn't have Kares. And therefore, if allowing the Sanhedrin Agdola to make a decision to extend the Orla to a case which the Torah did not include under Orla, and institute an Isur Hana Derabanan of Orla, that's a whole different story. That would not come under the Chiyuv of Zaken Mamre. And that's not like Chametz, because Chametz has a Chiyuv Kares. The Rabbanan are extending the Chiyuv Kares to the 6th hour. And if, let's say, a man would be Makadesh and Isha with Chametz in the 6th hour, according to the Sanhedrin, the Kedushin is invalid because the Rabbanan extended the Isur Hana and Chametz to the 6th hour. And therefore, they removed the Din Mamon. And we'll see that again in the second point that I want to review with you, Shalmi. Therefore, according to the Zaken Mamre, who says, wait a minute, I don't accept the Isur Chametz in the 6th hour. Chametz is only Asur in the 7th hour. And in that case of a man who married a woman with Chametz in the 6th hour, the Kedusha is perfectly valid, and she's an Eishes Ish. And the Rambam establishes that in Chametz, if there would be a dispute between the Sanhedrin Agdola and the Zaken Mamre about Chametz in the 6th hour, then we would put the Zaken Mamre to death. Where's the Chiyuv Kares? But the answer is that we're dealing with Chametz, which in itself is Kares. So when the Rabbanan extend Chametz into the 6th hour, then what they're basically doing is they're setting up an Isur Kares, not befall, not that, somebody who eats Chametz in the 6th hour is Chayv Kares. That's not within the purview of the Rabbanan. But what they can do is they can use their authority to remove the Din Mamon, so that now in a Kedusha Isha situation, he's not giving her Mamon. However, says Rabbi Chanan, that's only because Chametz has an Isur Kares attached to it. Orla does not. In a dispute between the Sanhedrin and the Zaken Mamre over Isur Hana Derabanan and Orla, That's a horse of a different color. That's not a din mamon. Then you're arguing about whether she had something, she received something that she could benefit from, and it's worth a pruta, and therefore becomes kesef. And Rabbi Chana is going to prove from a Yushalmi that the Rabbanan could not remove the status of kesef by creating Isuri Hana Derabanan. That far they can't go. So that in Chametz, the only reason that could justify the Chiyuv Zakei Mamre regarding the Machlokas in the 6th hour of Chametz is because Chametz itself is an Isur Kares. But in other Isuri Hana, for example, Arla, which is not in Kares at all, even if you max out, there's no Kares, then the best you can do with it is to say that he was Makadish and Isha with the Isuri Hana Derabanan of Arla. The Kedushin is not valid because she didn't receive a Shava Pruta, but that's not within the purview and the authority of the Chachamim to remove the Din Mammon. Now, where does Rebbe Chanan get this Din Mammon from? That's the second half of our Chazorah, to review what we did last week. And that is the Yushalmi. And the Yushalmi makes a distinction between Kesef and Shtar. In the case of Kesef, the Yushalmi says that whether or not he gave her Isuri Hana D'Oraisa or Isuri Hana D'Rabanan, the Kedusha would not be Chal. But if he was Makadisha with a Shtar, and the Shtar was written on Isuri Hana, then the Yushalmi differentiates between the two following cases. Case number one is the Shtar was written on Isuri Hana D'Oraisa, and case number two, the Shtar was written on Isuri Hana D'Rabanan. And the difference is going to be the following, says Rabbi Elchanan. In Shtar, it's irrelevant whether she receives something that she can sell, cash in, and benefit at a pruta's worth. That was never a requirement in Shtar. But what was a requirement in Shtar is that you need a din mama. You need the legal halachic status of mama. And herein, says the Yushalmi, lies the distinction between Isuri Hana D'Oraisa and Isuri Hana D'Rabanan. Isuri Hana D'Rabanan can remove the shabbos, the value, because she can't benefit from it, but it cannot remove the din mama. That din D'Oraisa remains in its place. However, if we're dealing with Isuri Hana D'Oraisa, that removes the status of mammon, and in Shtar, you need a din mammon for the Shtar. So that if he was Makadisha with a Shtar that was written on Isuri Hana D'Oraisa, insofar as Isuri D'Oraisa have no Shem mammon, the Kedushin is not Chal. But if on the other hand he wrote the Shtar on Isuri Hana Derabanan, then although she didn't receive anything that's worth a pruta, but that's irrelevant in the case of Shtar, we have a din in Shtar that Shtar has to have mama. So the only problem with Kedushin Shtar on Isuri Hana would be if it was Isuri Hana D'Oraisa, says the Yushalmi, and not Isuri Hana D'Rabanan. So Rabbosai, as we draw this picture in front of us, based on the insights of Rabbi Chanan, we're beginning to see the scope of Isurei Derabanan. And that means it reflects on the authority of the Rabbanan. The authority of the Rabbanan is very far-reaching, but it has its limitations. In the case of Isurei Hana, we see the limitations of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan could create Isurei Hana Derabanan, but that doesn't give it the status of Hafkas Din Mammon. It still remains Mammon D'Oraisa, and the Rabbanan can't undermine that. What the Rabbanan can do is they can remove the Hana by imposing an Isur Hana, and that's where the Rambam says in the case of Chametz there'll be a chiyuv zaken mamre based on an Isur Hana Derabanan. So when we say that the authority of the Rabbanan is far-reaching, here's an example of how far-reaching it could be. That as a result of a machlokes between the Sanhedrin Agdola and the Zaken Mamre on an issue of Isuri Hana Derabanan, we can put the Zaken Mamre to death. Because once the Rabbanan do this, they take the din hafkas moment of chametz, which has the status of a chiyuv kares, they superimpose it on the 6th hour, such that now the 6th hour becomes isurei derabanan, which have a din mamon to them. And what do I mean to have a din mamon? That the Rabbanan now are establishing that the din moment of this chametz in the 6th hour, it has been undermined, and therefore the kedusha wouldn't be chal. So here comes Burzon. I don't know if this is Rabbi Elchanan. So what I'm going to tell you now is, as we say, with limited liability, Be'eravon mugbal. I'm going to suggest that according to Rabbi Elchanan, if I understand his approach, if a man would write a shtar on chametz in the 6th hour, or let's just call it chametz of Isuri Hana Derabanan, and he gave that shtar to a woman, and he said, "Areh mekudeshes li b'shtar zeh," the kedusha would not be valid, because the Rabbanan in the case of chametz are extending the Isur Hana of chametz to the 6th hour, and therefore they will be mafkia the shem mamon, and the shtar is not written on mamon. Hence, it's invalid. Now, here is where we start the shir today. What happens if there's a dispute between the Zaken Mamre and the Sanhedrin about an esrog, where, let's say, the Sanhedrin decides that this esrog is not kosher, based on the way they classify this esrog? Comes along the Zaken and he says, no, the esrog is kosher. Or, for example, there was a machlokes between the Sanhedrin Agdola and the Zaken about tzitzis. There were chutei tzitzis, and the Sanhedrin Agdola established that these chutim are ksherim for tzitzis. And the Zaken Mamre says, no, they're psulim for tzitzis. Would the Zaken Mamre in these cases be chayav misa as a Zaken Mamre? Says Rabbi Elchanan, no, he would not be chayav. And Rabbi Elchanan admits that there's a voice in his ear that screams and says, wait a minute, if the man took these chutei tzitzis and gave it to a woman and said, Areh mekudeshes li, if a man took this esrog and he gave it to a woman and said, Areh mekudeshes li, would she be mekudeshes? Would she not be? Well, it depends.
Yes, you would. Because an etrog has value for other things. You can make jam out of it.
Oh, so let's say in the following case, let's go through 2 cases. Okay, here's case number 1. A man wears tzitzis on Shabbos in a Rishus HaRabim, and there's no Eruv. According to the Sanhedrin Agdola, if this case, the Sanhedrin Agdola paskin that he's Yotzei the mitzvah, let's just take that case. It doesn't matter either way. And the Zaken says he's not Yotzei the mitzvah. According to the Zaken Mamre, he's chayav for meleches hotzah doraisa because they're not chutim ksherim l'tzitzis. So according to the Sanhedrin Agdola, He's not carrying, it's not a masui, it's a beged, because it's part of his garment, insofar as the Torah commands him to supply his garment with tzitzis. We have now a machlokas between the Sanhedrin Agdola and the Zoki Mamre on a davar sheyesh bo kares, yesh bo chiyuv misa. That's case number one. Case number two, he gives these chutei tzitzis to a woman, and if they're ksherim l'tzitzis, they're worth a pruta. If they're not ksherim l'tzitzis, they're not even worth a pruta. That's the mitzvahs. You can argue with whatever. So Rabbi Chanan says that in this case, he's not chayav, the Zakei Mamre. Why not? Again, if you have the page that we sent out, it's page Peiches, which is the second page, and it's Os Ches on the bottom of the right column. Vinira, says Rabbi Chanan, the hadinas is zokin mamre al yidei davar shes dono kares hu dafka imanafkuso linyin kares hu mitzad etzem hadin. In other words, they're arguing about whether there's a din mama. Aval im hadin mitzad atzmo eno mevi lidei kares. So that even if the Derabanan, by passing these chutim, it would have an impact on Kedusha Isha, but that's not because of a din mammon. That's because it's not a shava pruta. She can't get benefit from it. Hadin gorem shal yodo nishtana mitzius. The legal decision will have an impact on the reality of the worth of an object. If the din is that this chud is kosher v'tzitzis, who shava pruta, it has the mitzias of a value. If, on the other hand, the chud is not kosher, so what are we saying here? Are we saying that it doesn't have a din mammon? No. We're saying in Mitzias, she doesn't receive anything of value. Oh, if they paskin this is chud is kosher l'tzitzis, hu litzarach ha-beged, right? He has to wear it on his beged, and in doing so, it's part of his beged, not masur. Eno shai klala din zaken mamre, because again, he's not changing the din, but changing the mitzias. In other words, with regard to the marriage and the validity or disqualification of the marriage, it's all a result of the mitzias. The din changes the mitzias. But as far as Hafkas Moment is concerned, as a din, we don't have any Hafkas Moment. They're not arguing about the Hafkas Moment. They're arguing about whether it's worth a penny in the market. That's not enough to be mechayev u'zokim mam. V'cheinim nechleku b'isuri anoshel divreihem. If there would be a dispute about, let's say, Arla Derabanan, which is also Mana, but only Derabanan, and then he would take this Arla Derabanan and give it to a woman as Kiddushin. It's true that Ein Isha Miskadeshes Bo, the Kedusha would not be valid, but why wouldn't it be valid? Hu Mishum de Befal, or if you want to put another word in Bimitzius, Eino Shava Klum. So it's the din that created a Mitzius. It's not an extension of an Isa Kares because we're talking about something that could never ever generate Kares. is Eno Nasal Yidei Zokin Mamre, Af, even though I have to admit to you, the Ikan Afkusa, there'll be an Afkamina as to whether or not the Kedushin Adoraisa valid or not valid. It's just like in tzitzis, where the din is going to have a repercussion as to whether it's valuable in the market, and that's a mitzius. So ultimately, what evolves from the dispute between the Sanhedrin and the Zokim Mamre is a mitzius. Again, that mitzius is very relevant, because if he's Makadish and Isha, now the issue would be whether the Kedushin is valid and she's an Ashes Isha or not. But it's only relevant because of a change in mitzius that emanates from the din. And Rabbi Chanan says that if the din changes because of mitzius, that's not a chiyuv zokim mamre. Everything has to be al pi din. Like, for example, chametz in the 6th hour. Hanafkusa linyan kedushin mitzad etzem adin. Okay, he gives a case where the Zokim Mamre holds that it's Asur Mano. So we're not talking about Chametz in the 6th hour. Let's say we talk about Chametz Nuksha. And the Rabbanu would say that Chametz Nuksha is Mutter Mano. And the Zokim Mamre would say the Chametz Nuksha is Asur Mano. Here the Zokim Mamre will be Chayav. Even though he's arguing about Isuri Hano Derabanan, which we said before, would not generate a chiyuv zokim mamre because it's only that the din changes the mitzius, and now it's not worth a pruta. Why is he chayav in the case of an iser anov chametz derabanan? And he says, because hanafkusa linyan kedusha, what generates this debate as to whether kedushin is valid? Who mitzad etzem adin. In other words, the Zokim Mamre, by saying that this Chametz Nuksha is also by no, he is being mafkia the din mamon. Oh, he says the ein bo din mamon. I would add those 3 words al pi din. The din or iser mafkia chashivas hamamon bimenu. It no longer has the legal status or significance of mamon. V'havi ki ilu nechlekoi madovru shalo o eno shalo. Devadei nasa zokin mamre al yedei zeh. Afilu inema di surya nohen shal balem mi komakom ein b'hem din mamon mi din Torah. Rabosa, do you see what he's saying over here? This is an amazing statement. He's saying that on a doraisa level, there's no status of mammon for something that the Rabbanan prohibited behana. That the Iser Hana, the Rabbanan, once established, removes the din mammon on a doraisa level. That which it removes the mitzias of mammon, and bifal, it's not worth a dime to her. She can't benefit from it in any way, in any shape or form. That's not going to generate a chiyuv Misa in the case of Zokim Mamre, because that's just the mitzius that emanates as a repercussion from the din, like in the case of Esrog and Chutei Tzitzis. So there's no chiyuv Zokim Mamre. That's the mitzius that comes from the din. But if there's going to be a machlokes about Iser Hana in a way that it has an implication on the din mamon, they're arguing about the din mamon. And now Rabbi Chanan is saying that din mamon is doraisa, even though the Yisur Hano was established by the Chacham. Am I reading this properly? Again, you tell me I'm wrong, because it can't be, right? But that's what he says, I think. Let's read it again. Correct? Because he's trying to explain, chametz. All right. And I just want to throw out an idea here, Rabosai. Again, this may be premature, but what about mitzvahs derabanan? Now we're talking about isurei derabanan. What about a mitzvah like Hanukkah or a mitzvah like Purim, Eruvin?
I have a question. What about the differences between Yeshiva Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? If we rule like Beit Hillel, can Beit Shammai continue teaching that they're ruling? Which we know. So how could you have the two things exist like that?
Well, I think that was already after that's what the Rambam writes at the beginning of Hilchos Mamrim, that at a certain point, the Sanhedrin was batel, and there's no longer Zaken Mamre. So Zaken Mamre only applies in the case of Beis Din HaGadol.
Right. So if Beis Din HaGadol realize they made a mistake and now they have to bring a carbon, if they ruled that someone was a Zaken Mamre, what do they do then?
What do you mean? They put someone to death mistakenly?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
I mean, potentially you have a real problem here, because if the Beis Din makes a mistake, right, and people follow that mistake, and then they have to bring a carbon to correct it, to do tshuva for it. But meanwhile, do they have to go into cherem? I mean, do they go to an ir miklah?
Again, I don't know if your discussion is relevant to Zaken Mamre. In general, you could ask a question: what happens in terms of kapara to a Sanhedrin that made a mistake, and as a result, let's say they put someone to death, maybe, right? So,
but it's a combination. It's a combination of mistakes. In other words, they ruled one way. The Zaken Mamre knew that they were wrong and followed his shita. They ruled that he's a Zaken Mamre. They executed him, and now they realize that he was right. It gets pretty complicated. I'm just taking it to a logical conclusion.
You see, what we have to know in order to analyze your question, Arthur, is what's the difference between Sanhedrin and another Beis Din? How does the special status of Sanhedrin kick into this whole thing? For example, with regard to another Beis Din, we have a system of overruling the decision of an earlier Beis Din. And for that, we have two basic requirements. It has to be gadol mimenu bechachma u'biminyan. So the latter Beis Din has to have more members on the court and has to have greater chachma than the first Beis Din in order to overrule it. And that's something that's probably not going to happen until Mashiach Zeit, With regard to Sanhedrin, I'm not sure exactly how you overrule the decision of a Sanhedrin. Certainly not in the Zaken Mamre. He can't do so. You're raising the question of a toes. If Sanhedrin realizes they made a big boo-boo. So then you get into, you'd have to really learn Masechet Sanhedrin. There's what's called Tov B'Dvar Mishnah, and then it's called Tov B'Umdana. Like there are different categories of mistakes that they can make. And then if you establish that they can overrule the decision of Sanhedrin and prove somehow that there was a mistake in the original psak, and the ruling was based on misinformation, then you have your question, what does Bezdin do in that case? Obviously, they're going to overrule their original decision, but then what happens if there's an irreversible damage that was caused? How do they, they chayiv a par helim davashal tzibur. There are all sorts of conditions that have to be met for a par helim davashal tzibur. So for that, we'd have to learn another Masechta, not even Sanhedrin. You probably have to learn Masechta Horios for that. But at this point, because my goal here in this series is to come to grips with the question of what status could a Derabanan have, that's why I was wondering about mitzvos like Chanukah and Purim. Do we say that once the Rabbanan instituted those mitzvos, they now take on the status of a doraisa? And you'll say to me, Burzon, you're off your rocker, right? But yet, if you heard of the Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, he counts the 7 mitzvahs to Rabbanan in Taryag mitzvahs. Amongst the 613, you'll have Chanukah and Purim and a bunch of others, Natilas Yadayim and Erevin. The Rambam actually opens up his Sefer Mitzvahs with a critique of the Bahag for this very reason. How can you calculate the Rabbanans like Chanukah and Purim in Taryag? It says that Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai received 613 mitzvahs. Now you're adding the Rabbanans, which were later institutions. And I'm hoping that at the end of the day, somehow we'll be able to justify the Bahag. But very, very easy to accept the Rambam. And again, I don't want to jump the gun here, but there's a real paradox because the Rambam himself holds that if you violated the Rabbanon, you're chayiv on a doraisa level for lo sasur. And the Ramban goes ballistic over the Rambam. How could you say such a thing? You've really broken down any distinction that we know of between a doraisa and the Rabbanon. The whole of Shas is based on that distinction. We're going to throw it out the window? Every violation of a Derabanan is a doraisa? And if he eats without washing, then he is in violation of Lotosa Mikosha Yorucha? That's what I'm hoping. But again, as I indicated, this is brand new to me. Let's go on to number tes. Ayin b'sukkah, daf lamed hey, the iflugu amaroi b'hodei the yotze b'esrog shal orla. So we have now a machlokes whether or not you can fulfill your mitzvah of ulekachtem lachem with an esrog of orla. So the esrog is shalem, it's perfect. There are no blemishes on the esrog. It's not a stolen esrog or a borrowed esrog. It's your esrog. The only problem is it's aser ba'ano. So does that mean that since you cannot benefit from it, it's worthless for you, therefore it's not yours? You don't own it. You can't own something that's aser ba'ano. So Chadam, according to one opinion, that in order to be yotze the mitzvah of dalid minim, in the case of esrog at least, you have to have something that's a bar achila, it's royal achila. V'chadam mipnei ein bo din mama. Now watch this. This is the source for Rabbi Chanan. Ein bo din mama, that the Isser Anah of Orla removes the din mama. Ulakachtem lachem means you have to have bailus, you have to have ownership of the talmidim in mamon terms, b'dinei mamonos. But if it doesn't have a din mamon, then you cannot possibly have bailus. Hence, it's not a lekachtem lachem, and you're not yotze the mitzvah of daled minim. And the other man, the owner says, forget about that.
Without mammon,
Say it again?
you can't own something that doesn't have monetary value.
If the Isser Hana is doraisa, then as we've said over and over again, the Isser Hana removes the din mammon. That's why the Yushalmi says if you write a star on something that's Asr Hana doraisa, and you give the star to a woman, she's not married because the star has to be worth mammon, and it doesn't have a din mammon because the Isser Hana doraisa removes the din mammon. And in the same vein, if he gives her an esrog of Arla, which is also by no doraisa, then that esrog doesn't have a din mammon to it. And if it doesn't have a din mammon, it's not a lekachtem lachem, because lachem requires ownership. Again, in simple terms, again, without getting, too complicated, what we're saying is that a din mammon means that your bailus expresses itself in some way, in some shape or form. Once it's asur b'hana, what's the difference between you and anyone else on the face of the earth? I could steal it from you, I could destroy it, I didn't take anything from you. It's asur b'hana. So what bailus do you have? How does your bailus express itself? Can I put a gun and say, don't go near this object? If you take it away from me, you take this arla, I'll knock your block off. What does it mean? It's asur b'hana. What bailus do I have on Isur Hana? So that's called afkas din mama, which would mean, by the way, in terms of zaken mamre, based on the principles that Rabbi Chanan is laying down here, that if there be a machlokes between the Chachmei Sanhedrin and the zaken mamre about arla on a doraisa level, because here we're talking about esrog shel arla, right? An esrog tree is no worse than any other tree, and Peres Elon or Asum Ba'adna Doraisa, based on the Isra Arla, then the Zaken Mamre in this case would be Chayav Misa. Why? Because he's being mafkir the din mama. So when the machlokes between the Chachmei Sanhedrin and the Zaken Mamre is about Isur Hana Derabanan, like let's say Arla Derabanan, then the Rabbanan don't have the capacity to remove the din mama. They can only make it worthless, but it's not it still has a din mama. And then we get back to Rabbi Chanan's provision that his Zaken Mamre is only chayav if he's arguing on the din, not if he's arguing on a mitzias. If, on the other hand, they debate about Isur Hana Doraisa, now they're arguing about a din and an afkas moment and din, and that's the case of an esrog shel arla. So again, in an esrog shel arla, according to one man, the reason why you're not yotze lekachtem lachem b'yom harishon, because lachem requires bailus, and Isur Hana paka le din mama. There's no din mammon on Isur Hana, and we're dealing with Isur Hana Doraisa, Arla. Would a Zaken Mamre be chayav if he argued against the Beis Din HaGadol about this esrog shel Arla? Let's say the Zaken Mamre would tell you that esrog trees are not like any other trees, and therefore they're not included in Arla, and they're mutar b'hana against the Beis Din HaGadol. According to Rabbi Chanan, he should be put to death. Because if they're arguing about Isur Hana Doraisa, they're arguing about a din mama. So when the Kedushin comes about, if he's Makadisha with Arla of an esrog tree, then the issue would be now whether she's Mekudeshes Midin Mammon or not. And he who issued a verdict that the Arla in esrog is Doraisa, it's an Isur Hana Doraisa, he's telling you that there's no din mama, and therefore the Zokin Mamre disagrees with him. He's arguing about the status of the kedushin on a din mama level, and he's chayv mishum Zokin Mamre. But yet, the Bavli quotes another Mandiomer who says that the problem with Arla in Esrog, as far as the mitzvah of Daled Minim is concerned, is a different problem entirely. And what is that problem? Ein bo heter achila. That there's some halacha, which we're going to derive from Sukkim, that for l'kachtem lachem b'yom harishon pre-eitz hadar, you need a pre-eitz hadar that could be eaten. And since it's early, you're not allowed to eat it, therefore it's not kosher for the Daled Minim. So is there an afkamina between these two definitions? And the answer is Meiser Sheni. What's the status of an esrog of Meiser Sheni? On the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, you are mafresh this esrog as Meiser Sheni. We're going according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds Meiser Sheni Mammon Gavah. It doesn't belong to you. Leman di Omar Mammon Gavahu Dilaman V'lo Boy did Mammon. Yotze b'esrog shel Meiser Sheni. If you're going to hold that all you need for an esrog to kasher the esrog is yeshbo din achila, then Meiser Sheni has a mitzvah of achila, and therefore you can be yotze. But if you're saying that in the din of ulakachtem lachem, I need something that has a din mammon to it, then Meiser Sheni, according to Rabbi Meir, is mama gavah. There's no din mammon on Meiser Sheni. The imkain b'amen echliku b'Meiser Sheni. I'll leave it to Rabbi Meir. But now the question applies the following: the Torah says ulakachtem lachem. So when you tell me that Meiser Sheni is mutar b'achila, so what? It's not lachem. There's no din mammon. We're going according to Rabbi Meir that holds that Meiser Sheni mammon gavah. You don't own Meiser Sheni. You have a mitzvah to take it to Yerushalayim and eat it b'kedusha b'tara, but it's not yours. It's mammon gavah. So how can you possibly say l'kachtem lachem and you can be yotze because it's roy lachila? Pili Plain, Rebbe Chanan is, I've used the word chutzpah in a positive way. The chutzpah of Rebbe Chanan to say that we don't understand a line of a Gemara. And based on this question, he makes a radical change, breaks new ground. And he says the following, the Gam Rabbi Meir moded the gufa maisu shalabaylim. What is going on over here? Rabbi Meir says that Meiser Sheni is Mama Gavah. And now Rabbi Chanan is saying, no, you own the Meiser Sheni. What do you mean? It says Mama Gavah. You don't own it. It belongs to Gavah. El She'ebo did Mama. But you own it. You know, Tislach li Habibi. Can you give me a precedent? Can you quote one case of something that doesn't have a din mammon and yet it's mine? I have bailus over. You're telling me that Meiser Sheni, according to Rabbi Meir, is mine, even though it's mammon gavah and it doesn't have a din mammon. Where do you get such a thing? Dugma lezu matzinu. I found a case, says Rabbi Chanan. I found a precedent. You know, for those who are interested in precedent theory in halacha, this is a beautiful example. Mafkir avdo. A man owns an eved knani, and he declares it's hefker. Ika mandi omadi enu yachol lahorish lebanav. The isura lebrei lo moris. Af shegufa everu shalom v'tzach shtar shichur mimenu el she'en bo din mamon. Yishim hachi nira dienu yachol l'mochel l'kuli alma afilu man diyom diyachol l'risho. He says the following. There's a machlokes about the status of an eved whose master, his adon, was mafkir the eved. And the issue is the Yerusha on such an eved to the master's heirs? One man the Yomer says, "Eni yochel orisha lebana." What do you mean, "Eni yochel orisha lebana"? What's the issue over here? He was mafker the eved. Did you ever hear of something which is hefker and you could be morish it? You could bequeath it to somebody, some of your heirs? It's hefker. You don't own it. Says Rav Elchanan, apparently, despite the fact that you have mafkir the eved and it doesn't, and the eved no longer has a din mamon, nevertheless you own the eved. The Heres the Maisa, you listening to this, Rabbosai? You can own an eved that you have mafkir, and now you can bequeath it to your yarsh, the eved to your yarsh. Why? Says Rav Elchanan, because you have to give the eved a shtar shichru. It's not enough that you are mafkir the eved. And to be mafkir the eved removes one dimension of your ownership, but not completely. You still own the eved. It's not midin mamon, but midin isur v'heta, midin isurin. So the eved has the same status of an eved knani, even after you are mafkir the eved. Could you imagine? We're 9 people. You see? We're 9 people. Oh, we're only one person. Okay. But let's say theoretically we were 9 people, right? And now we need a 10th person for a minyan. So we have this Eved Knani. He can't be the 10th person. So we say to the Adon, be mafkir him. Still can't be part of the minyan. Or alternatively, would the Eved be chayav in mitzvahs aseishas man grama? Time-bound mitzvahs. The answer is no. He's not chayav because you didn't deliver a shtar shichur into his hands. So you are mafkia the din mamon, but he still remains your Eved as far as the Isurim are concerned. And therefore, you could be morish the Eved after your death to your heirs. What do we see from this? That you can remove the din mamon, and still own the Eved. And Rabbi Elchanan sees in this a precedent for the case of Meiser Sheni, according to Rabbi Meir, who holds mamon gavoa, but it's still yours. And therefore, even though you are mafkia the din mamon, because mamon gavoa, according to Rabbi Meir, but nevertheless you still have bailus over the esrog. You can be yotze midin lachem, and you're allowed to eat the esrog, so there's no problem that it's a roy lachila, because that's a mitzvah ma'aser sheni to eat the esrog. Or as Arthur would say, to make jam out of the esrog. Do you hear what's going on, Rabbosai? I'll read it inside again. So Rabbi Meir moded the gufa meiser who shall abailin. Okay, it doesn't have a din mamon because it's mamon gavoa, but you still have bailus over it. How does that bailus express itself? Take it to Yerushalayim and eat it, enjoy it, or be hoded. El shein bo din mamon. And therefore, the Gemara says you could be makayim the mitzvah l'kachtem lachem, and it's lachem because you have bailus over it, even though there's no din mama. V'dugma lezeh matzina b'mafker avdo, di'ikaman di'omar, di'enu yachalo rishol lebanov. Right, he doesn't have a din mamon, so if he doesn't have a din mamon, he can't be morishiv. Di'sura lebrela moris, afshe gufa eved ushalo. I'm going to prove to you, says Rabbi Chanan, that the evidence is still his. And there'll be one man, the other says, Yachal Risha, even though he was mafker the evidence. Why? Because Sarach Shichur Bimenu. And Gabi all Isurim, he still has a status, retains the status of an Eved Ivri. El Shem Bo Din Mama. So now the question is, does Yerusha depend upon Din Mama, or does the Yerusha depend upon Bailas? Okay, if he wants to sell the Eved, he can't do so. That's clear because it has no Din Mama. But your Bailas over the Eved is sufficient to be Morishit, because Yerusha is not like Mechira. In Mechira, you need a Das Machna, you need a Das Kone, you need a Shava Pruta, you need a Din Mamon, but not Yerusha. All I need for Yerusha is Bailas. And the Nafkamina is going to be Eved Knani Li'acha Shehifkers Avdo Kodem Shenasa Lo Shenasa V'Yolo Shtash Shichrur, or Esrog Shel Maisa Sheni Aliva de Rabbi Meir. Can you be Yotze the mitzvah of Daled Min? So this is Bailus without a Din Mama. Obviously, even Rabbi Meir, I'm saying it's posture that according to Rabbi Meir, he can't sell Maisa Sheni in the open market because he doesn't have a Din Mama. But he could be Morishid to his children. And they'll have the mitzvah of taking the Maisa Sheni to Yerushalayim. And for that matter, you could be Yotze with this Esrog on Sukkot.
Yeah, but doesn't it lack Heta Achila?
No.
Which is the definition of fruit, because outside it's only inside Yerushalayim that it has the
so that's you're raising another issue. We're talking in Yerushalayim now, or even outside Yerushalayim, because it has a din achila in Yerushalayim.
But it has since it's not achila outside Yerushalayim, therefore you can't use it because you can't eat it.
No, but
it's
it could
defined
be
as fruit.
You need a din achila. You don't have to have a heter achila here before. You need a din achila. And it has a din achila.
So outside Yerushalayim you can't eat it. Therefore, it's not valid for the mitzvah. Even
outside Yerushalayim, it has a din achila. Al pi din, it's nechal. That's the mitzvah that's chal in the kedushas ma'aser sheni generates a mitzvah achila. You're true. You have to relocate yourself. But the chefta is a chefta of achila, and the mitzvah is a mitzvah of achila. I'll give you an example. Okay, I don't want to get off the tangent, but let's say ma'aser sheni would fall into a mixture, and the question is whether it's bittul or not. So would you say that it's a davar sheish lo matirin? It all depends. If you're saying that it has a heter achila now, it's just I have to relocate myself, then it's a davar sheish lo matirin. If on the other hand I say no, right now it doesn't have a din achila because I'm located outside of Yerushalayim, then it should be batel because it's not a davar sheish lo matirin. I'm just giving you an example. And I want to just wrap this up with the next line. V'chein bi'arla. So now we get back to the case of an esrog shel arla. And we said that according to one man diomar, you're not yotze with the esrog shel arla because ain't bo din achila. According to the other man diomar, you're not yotze with esrog shel arla because ain't lo din mamon. And then afkamina is going to be the case of an esrog shel ma'aser sheni. V'chein arla, the arla gufa davar hu shel habaylim. El di ein habaylim bo din mama. So can you sell isuri ano like arla? The answer is no. Even though you have violence over it, but it doesn't have a din mama. You can't sell something that doesn't have a din mama, like we spoke about ma'aser sheni, according to Rabbi Meir. or an Eved after he was mafkir, you mafkir din mamon, can't sell it. Oh, now he quotes the Sugi Baba Kama Daf Memhei of Shar Niskal Li Achar Gmar Din, which is also by no. So the carcass might be worth something in many different ways, but you're not allowed to have benefit from it. It's therefore Eino Machor, Macharo Eino Machor. You can't sell it. The sale is not valid. Iktisha and Muktash. What happens if he dies? Yachol iknosu be Yerusha. Why? Because Yerusha is memela. It doesn't require a kinyan. For a kinyan, you need a din mama. But for Yerusha, you don't need a din mama. Hence, an Eved Knani Liachar Hefker is subject to Yerusha. And an Arlo, which is Isuri Anah, and therefore doesn't have a din mama, but it would be subject to Yerusha. So to a Shar Niskal, after Gemar Din, would lend itself to Yerusha, to Memele, because that's automatic. You don't need a Hakna. Kimavur Baran and Dorim Daf Mem Zayin Ayin Shon. All right, we'll get there in about 10 days. Now, for tomorrow, for next time, we're at a crossroads. We can either finish up Tes Yud, and these will take us into various areas of halacha, journeys through the laws of Gezel and Hakna and Din Mamon, Bailus Din Mamon, Shem Truma, or what I might suggest is that we fast forward to Yud Aleph, because here we're getting really down to the nitty-gritties of Derabanans. And whether or not we can recognize Derabanans on a Doraisa level. So that starts on Yud Aleph. Now, what pages did I give you? Do you have page pay tests already? Can you just send me an email or a WhatsApp message if you have pay tests? Because otherwise I'm going to have to use my photography skills here, which are very limited. All right, you let me know. I don't have to know this minute. Okay, Rabosai? So wish everyone a great week, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.